To Radio Kidnappers, the voice of Hawke's Bay. This is the program called Dispute Solutions, and it's our pleasure, as always, to have in the hot seat Megan Williams. How are you, Megan?
Good. How are you, Ken?
I'm pretty good, thanks. Now we're going to carry on from where we left off last time. Last time we talked about the interview process, and today we're going to talk about induction into an employer's place of business. But before we get there, just remind our listeners what you do.
Well, what I do is I'm a dispute resolution practitioner, and my business sorts out people's disputes with either their employer or their employee or ACC or anybody, really. Because I'm a mediator, I can sort of guide you in the right direction with any dispute that you have. But today we're talking mainly about employment disputes at the moment.
Yes. Now, if we wanted to come and see you, where are you? Do you have an office?
Yes, I do. Your best is to ring me up because I work from home and I only have my office to interview my clients. So you've got the privacy, no computer there, no telephone, so you get the undivided attention. And the office is in Suite 2, 115 Avenue Road East, round the corner from Kmart Plaza, opposite the Baby Factory.
And if we wanted to call you, your number is?
Is 06, it's Hastings. 8785607, or the cell is 0274 739 255.
Now, like I said at the beginning of the program last week, we spoke about the interview process, what you can and what can't be asked of you. Today, let's presume that we've got the job, we turn up at our new place of employment, and we'd like to hope that we are going to go through some sort of induction process. Now, before we go through the nitty-gritty, tell us what an induction process actually is.
Right. Well, this program, I like to have it from both the employer and the employee point of view, and the advantages and disadvantages. An induction is when a person starts, and it is introducing them to all the different processes and procedures that are in place in the physical and the environmental, the culture of the organisation. And so it's really important, and statistics have shown if a person gets a really good induction, they're likely to stay employed in that employment for a longer period of time. So it's only common courtesy to do a proper induction when a person arrives at work, to introduce them to people and to have them know what's happening and to understand the culture and what's expected of them. Now, before they've started work, as we talked about last time, they must have signed the employment agreement, and they should have had the opportunity to have somebody look at the employment agreement, and that might take a couple of weeks. That because in the employment agreement they sign the fact that they have had that opportunity to seek legal advice or seek advice regarding it. And if the employer wants the trial period to be legal, the person must have signed that document before they start even 5 minutes of the job. If the employer wants to take advantage of that, and we can talk about that another day.
Sure.
But so that's that before they've started, they have had the opportunity to read through the employment agreement and the job description. However, when they actually walk through the door, and the induction can start before they actually start the work. For instance, things like where do they park their car? Where is the office? It might not, they might have been interviewed by an agency. They might not even know where the working premises are. Mind you, in the employment agreement, it will have where the work premises are, and so they must, so where do they park their car? What time are they expected to start work? There's a lot of induction areas that they need to know before they actually come. Is there food available, or do they have to bring their lunch? All those sorts of things. Okay?
So that's what we would call a pre-induction, and would a prospective employee suggest to the employer that's a good idea, or most of us probably a bit embarrassed to even ask, I suppose, but is that a good idea? Say, look.
Well, for an employer, it's a good idea to have. Now, I've got an induction checklist sheet here, and you can download it on the internet, so it's not rocket science, but it just covers all those things, and it's a good idea to have that, because everybody in employment has a file with their employment agreement in, and their name, address, and their next of kin, and all those sorts of things. That's in their file, their employment file. So their induction checklist should be in their employment file. So when the person starts work, you've given them employment agreement, you can check off that they've signed it before they've started work, and then you've got their induction checklist.
Yeah. Is the induction procedure a one-off, or is it an ongoing thing? You couldn't possibly learn everything in one induction meeting, could you?
No. So what you do is you've got your pre-employment induction part, and that's where you're checking through the job description. You're checking, where about who's the person going to report to on the first day. I mean, do they just arrive up and sort of, so the person's got to know the name of the person, and the person that's going to welcome them, they've got to know that they're going to be welcoming them, because they don't want to just arrive and, oh goodness, I had my day planned and I have to show this person around. So that's all got to be done beforehand, and then things like, as I say, shall they bring their lunch, or do they with their car park? They need to know, when they arrive, they need to know who their manager is. It's a good idea for them to understand the structure of the business, because that can be very sort of vague. So you ask the question, is it just the first day? No, it's usually the first week, the first day, then there's the first week, and then there's the first month. And so it's an ongoing process, and the better that induction process is carried out, the more efficient and effective that person's going to be, and the sooner they're going to be efficient and effective.
Interesting point that you raise on a pre-induction. And there's been a bit of argy-bargy in the news lately about having to turn up for a bit of a chin wag before we open the door. So if my prospective employer says to me, look, I've got a pre-induction meeting the day before you start work, would I be expected to be getting paid for that, or is that just...
No, what you would do for the pre-induction, it's a good idea to have that letter. And if it's offer and acceptance, so you offer the person the job, and you've given them the opportunity to have the employment agreement and the job description, so they know what they're taking on. And once they've been offered the job, then they accept the job. Now, once they accept the job, well, then there's a letter. You should write a letter to them saying, thank you for accepting the job. I expect to see you at such and such a time, at such and such a place. And in that, you can have that preliminary induction information.
Yes.
So please, this is where you can park the car. This will be your lunch hour, or this won't be your lunch hour. You'll have half an hour for lunch, or whatever, the processes will be.
So, but if I was expected to turn up to, say, have a walk through the factory or the shop or wherever I was going to be working, at that point, if I physically got to arrive, would I be expecting to be paid for that? Well,
yes, because I would presume that would be the first day. That would be your induction day. And, of course, that's when you're starting the work.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay, now you've got a checklist there. Let's maybe go through it, eh?
Okay, well, it's a good idea to explain the structure of the business and where that person fits. I always think that it's really nice for an employee to understand where they fit in to the bigger picture of the work. For instance, a company might have a parent company, and then because that can be a bit confusing, somebody might talk about a different name, and they won't understand that, that's actually the people that, we're actually managed by an organisation in Australia. And so it's very important that a person understands the structure and the sort of work, then where they fit into the bigger picture. For instance, say you were working at Watties and you were doing a particular job which might be completely separate to the canning of food, but it's really nice to understand where that particular role fits into the bigger picture of Watties.
Indeed. So
that's so then there's a list of to introduce. Now, you introduce the person obviously to the manager or the owner of the company, or and the supervisor, their co-workers, and to understand where the co-workers fit in, and the health and safety representative, so the person that they would go to if there was a health and safety issue, and then also to understand where the exits are, fire exits, right from the beginning, and any emergency wardens. So right from the beginning, they need to know, because the health and safety induction is really important in this day and age under the Health and Safety Act.
Do you find that most employers in particular are now pretty hot on that sort of stuff? Because in the old days, you sort of bowled up to work and they took you in, you said, g'day, put your bag over there, let's start work. And then as you were working on the job, you were inducted basically as you went, weren't you?
Well, of course, there's been a higher level with the new Health and Safety Act. Of course, you've got that much higher level. And I've seen some very, very sad cases where people have been carrying out the functions of their tasks of their job for 30-odd years.
Yep.
And then with this new act, they just slip up on one little thing like putting a bolt somewhere and they can be dismissed. And I've seen some very sad cases like that. So the new Health and Safety Acts are very important, and it's very important that the employees realise that. The employers will take it on board, because financially, if something goes wrong, they can be held liable. And so they really do take it seriously. And also, the more accidents they have, the higher their ACC levies.
Yeah.
So it hits them in the back pocket, whereas the employees, it doesn't hit them so much in the back pocket, but they can be dismissed if they don't adhere to it, because they're not taking all reasonable steps.
I suppose, like any job, there must be two lists. There must be the list which is the induction must include these items, and then there's the list which says the induction list might also contain these items, which might not be quite so important. Is that the case with inductions or not?
Well, there's no rule that says you have to have an induction apart from the health and safety. I mean, the Health and Safety Act, you've got to take the people around, and so they've got to be aware of the hazards and things like that. But there's no hard and fast rule that says you've got to have an induction when you go to work. Some people are literally turn up and they just, that's it, that's right. But my advice to any employer is to give an employee a good induction, because they feel, I mean, when you know, there's nothing worse than going home that first night and just being totally confused. And I remember when I was when I was training as a dental nurse, my husband, he wasn't my husband then, but he was at university and he started work in a big accounting firm, and he was given the phone book the first day that he had to just add up the numbers, because what on earth that was for, I do not know. But you know, in those days it was a completely different, you were giving the company handbook and you were just sitting in a room and had to read it. I mean, it was just very sort of unfriendly, but it was the way they did it in those days. There was much higher hierarchy, and people didn't need to know. It's also really important to understand the conditions of the employment. I mean, obviously you've read through your agreement, and so that you know that you know what your job is and what your job description is. The job description is, I can't stress. You'll probably find every single time we have a session here, I will talk about the job description, because the job description is really, really important. Now, and within that employment agreement, obviously, you know your leave entitlements. Now, I had somebody ring me today, and he had been off work sick, and I said, how long have you been working there? He said 5 weeks, and he'd been dismissed. And I said, the problem was obviously the way they dismissed him was lacked the rules of natural justice, but he'd been there 5 weeks and he'd had 13 days off, so because he wasn't entitled to any sick leave, and he was really confused because they had dismissed him. They had dismissed him in a procedurally unfair way, so he could challenge that. But they actually had employed someone to work. They hadn't employed someone to not be there.
Yeah, exactly.
And what was happening, that was blocking somebody to do the work. 'Cause at the end of the day, an employer employs an employee to do the tasks that need to be done.
Exactly.
So it's a good idea to know those leave entitlements, and to know about how to, if you are sick, how to notify, and also what your sick leave entitlements are. And also your emergency procedures. It's important that the people understand who your next of kin are, and so if something did go wrong, who to contact. And it's important that you know who to contact if you are sick, or if you needed to make some inquiries about the company. If there was a fire there or something, then you know over the night, who would you contact? And also the time records. You need to understand whether you're supposed to be keeping the time records, your hours. It depends on the type of employment you are. Are you clocking in and clocking out, or do you have to keep your own hours so as you can notify whoever you need to notify? Those are very important, those details, because I mean, it's no point saying in the week, well, tell us what you did, what the hours you did, sure, because you know the person doesn't know. And then they need to understand, of course, the meal breaks and what time they particularly have their meal breaks, or their morning and afternoon tea breaks. Do they have them, and are they allowed to have them? Where do they go for them? All those sorts of things. They also need to know the pay, you know, when they're going to be getting paid, what day they're being paid, and the employer needs to know their bank account.
Sure.
Are they going to be paid in cash? Usually this day and age people are paid online.
Not like the good old days.
Bank account. No, you didn't get a little brown envelope. But the pay arrangements are really important. The rates of pay and any allowances that you might be getting for you might get a tool allowance, you might get a uniform allowance, things like you might get petrol allowance. And those things need to be explained to you so as you understand how you apply for those. And also your KiwiSaver or your superannuation. Now, in New Zealand, you're automatically in the KiwiSaver unless you opt out. And so the employer must know all those details, your KiwiSaver number, so as they know how to adhere to that. Obviously, you must let them know your taxation and any other deductions that, and those forms need to be completed, your tax codes. And those have got to be, that's right from the word go. No point doing it a couple of weeks later when you've already been paid.
Now, all that stuff you're talking about at the moment, we're talking about induction, and this is all like day one stuff, but Is this an induction list, or is this also part of your contract? Because would have to be, wouldn't it?
Well, it's not usually in your employment agreement. No, in the employment agreement, it will say how. Well, it usually says the day that you're paid, and how you're paid, and how much you're paid. But it doesn't have all those other details in it. No, an employment agreement doesn't. So that's why it's so important to have an induction checklist, because some of those things a person could be a bit confused as to, you know.
And what if you haven't been inducted like the way you're describing at the moment? I mean, do we have to sign off on an induction to say that we fully understand what's been going on?
Well,
here?
you can, and that's why I think it's important to have that checklist, because on the checklist, like I've got a checklist here, and on the back it's got an acknowledgement that the person has been inducted properly. But a lot of people don't do it, but I think it's to their detriment, really, and it is important to do it.
If you don't do it, and we cross a line and we say, well, we didn't know, it's not on our contract, and it's not on the induction chart because we didn't get one, how do we stand then? Who's at fault? The employer?
Well, it depends what they're breaching. In other words, if they haven't paid the right amount, or if they haven't paid the right tax. You'd be amazed how some people come to me and if they've been dismissed, and they'll say, well, no, I don't really know if they actually paid that tax, because I don't remember ever signing a tax form. And, you know, the PAYE appears to be coming out on my pay slip, but I don't know whether and sometimes I've had clients ring the IRD, and they're right, the tax hasn't been going through to the IRD. There are certainly some cowboys out there, but most organisations nowadays are pretty good with the tax. And they have this process that when a person arrives, they fill out their tax forms.
So do you think employees should not quite insist? We don't want to use too strong a word, but should they insist on an induction process that you were talking about here, and they say, okay, well, now I fully understand, now I will sign it, and well, the same goes for employees. Should they insist that an employee goes through an induction like this and signs off saying they fully understand all the whys and the wherefores, because it'll just avoid any problems down the track, won't it?
Absolutely correct. Because later on, and a person can often say, well, I was never told. I didn't know that was how they were supposed to do it, you know. And I mean, that's up to the employer to make sure that the people are told. Can
the employer actually sort of bring into the argument, it's common sense? Is common sense an argument that someone can use these days, in this day and age, that's saying, you know, well, we wouldn't expect you to stand on a chair to change a light bulb in this day and age.
Well, these days, common sense has got right out the window. Don't start me on it. But no, I think, you know, as long as the employer takes all reasonable steps, and the employee's got to know that they've got to take all reasonable steps to keep each other, not have anybody that they are in contact with, whether it be a client, a fellow staff member, manager, or anybody in the environment, even a visitor coming into the workplace, they've got to take all reasonable steps to keep themselves safe and anybody else safe. And so, you know, you can use common sense to a certain degree, but it is, how do you measure common sense?
Well, yeah, but I mean, you can't possibly write everything in an induction plan or in a contract, and sooner or later you've got to say, are you kidding me? You did what?
The Health and Safety Act is quite different, because you do have to identify what the hazards are. And so a person is supposed to be responsible to understanding the employer has to tell the employee the hazards, and they'll have a hazard plan, hazard management plan, and all those sorts of things. And that's all part of the induction, the health and safety, which I was just going on to. They need to communicate the processes and the health and and who the health and safety people representatives are. So, you know, they need to know. And, you know, when you go to a concert or anything, even these days, people have got to tell you.
Yes, indeed.
Now, you know, if these are the exits, and you've got to make the people aware of any health and safety.
It's like a minefield, isn't it?
It certainly is.
I mean, people probably don't realise that we're filmed. Well, they do realise we're filming because they're watching it on YouTube. But at the moment, we've got a cable running across the floor, and as a health and safety matter, I've put a mat across the top of it. But I normally wouldn't, because only I am going to approach the camera. But if I forgot about that and stood up and walked out the door and tripped up and broke the camera and fell over and broke my arm, who's to blame?
Well, you're to blame, aren't you?
I'm to blame for doing it, but could I say to the employer, well, look, you didn't tell me I need to put a mat over that cable. Could I use that defence? Or you got to say, well, common sense must prevail here.
Yeah,
Ken.
well, you could try, but I mean, this organisation doesn't have a mass amount of people and doesn't have a health and safety system. But yes, if you're in a bigger organisation and they were remiss, because that's when there is a serious accident and it's reported, which as it should be, well, then they would do an investigation and you can have huge fines.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
carry on. Induction programs.
Okay, well, I talked about where to park the car, the eating facilities, the lockers. Where's the person's locker, and do they have a locker or a changing room? Do they have access to a key, or don't they? Do they get a key to the premises?
Should that be an expectation in this day and age? I mean, even here we've only got 3 people working full-time, but we do have a lot of people coming in the building. Should there be an expectation that we can have a locker provided by the employer, or... It
depends usually. I don't think I've ever had a locker in a job that I've had. But usually, if you have a desk, you put things that.
That's right.
There's usually an area. But I think it's only fair to tell the person this is your particular area. This is where you put your handbag. This is where you put your coat, or your satchel, or whatever. So I think that's what they mean by the locker. Sure. Now, also policies regarding phone calls, private phone calls. Do you have a cell phone? Is that part of your the things that's supplied? Or if it isn't, whereabouts do you keep? Now, some organisations have very strict policies. I've had people dismissed based on the fact that they've been instructed to have their phone kept off their person while they're working, and they haven't. And that can be disobeying a reasonable instruction, especially these days when people are on, Facebook and da-da-da-da. And so you need to know right from the word go the telephone policy. Yeah. Okay, and also your Facebook policy, the use of the computers, that sort of thing. So as people don't, right from the start, it's not a very good idea for an employer, even a few weeks down the track, say, well, look, we forgot to tell you, but you're not allowed to go on Facebook during work time. Because that is stealing. It's stealing the time.
Right. I wonder what you're saying sounds all very well. I'm sure it's 100% accurate, but maybe from a corporate point of view, I can understand why you would come across this and have all that information at your fingertips, because you've got an HR person who's handling all the contracts, all the inductions. But what about when you've got Joe Blow who's opened up a shop in Heratonga Street, and obviously you're going to say, yes, he should know all this stuff, but what happens in that respect? Is the expectation on the employer regardless of what they've got?
Well, the thing is, it can go pear-shaped. Now, I deal with disputes, and so I deal when things do go pear-shaped.
That's right.
And so that's why I'm a great believer, although it is the law to have an employment agreement and a job description, it is a good idea to have a checklist, because this little checklist I've got here, which people that are watching on the video can see, it's not that comprehensive. No. And if you can just glance your eyes down that and make sure that person knows, it can really make a difference later on. For instance, if you don't cover, say, the Facebook policy or the telephone policy, what happens in a small organisation like that is the boss has got, say it's an admin person, they're coming in and you're teaching them and say, look, I want you to do my finances, and I've got 4 staff and I want you to pay the staff each week, and I want to make sure that my time schedules, so I'm charging out, time is going right, etc., etc. And you come in a couple of days later and you see the person sort of checking their Facebook page, and, oh, fine, And then after a couple of weeks, you go home at night and you think, damn it, she's going into that flippin' Facebook. And it just starting to bug you. And then the next day you're having a chat about something, but you're just a bit annoyed. And she can tell that edge on your voice, and that's what causes disputes. I mean, she doesn't know that you've been lying in bed that night thinking, damn her, she was on Facebook. Yes. She's stealing my time. But
that's what she's doing.
And that's right. Yeah. And so, it just avoids, and that's when people come to say to me, and they say, oh, I was working for a friend, and, we just had this, I was just said I'd help them out. Yeah. And nothing was formalised. Yeah. And that's when I say, look, and you hear it. I mean, I've got a really good friend, her and her husband went into partnership with her friend and her husband. They were set up this business, and it was great to start with. Nothing was really in writing, and but then of course when it goes pear-shaped, well, and also when you're in the dispute tribunal, as I was, the first thing you look at, and when people ring me up, they say, we've got this dispute, and the first thing you look at is the contract. What was put into writing? What were the basis of that structure? Was there a structure? Because without that structure, everybody has a different... You don't know what's in people's heads.
Exactly. Just about out of time. And what we've been talking about today is the perfect reason that if we're particularly in a small business, that if we come and see you, you're going to have all those...
The other things, of course, you need to tell them about where the toilets are.
Indeed.
And when's the process for doing having your lunch. Yeah. So where's the kitchen? If they need a cup of coffee, are they allowed to have a cup of coffee during their work time? All those sorts of things. And you're right. If there is a dispute or you've got some concerns, phone call. I don't charge for a phone
That's right,
call.
you do not.
So, that's, and I can do just so much by a phone call saying, well, this is what I would do. It might be write a letter, or it might be talk to them, or, and then when it really does hit the fan, well, then you can come and
see
I
you.
can help you. Yeah.
Megan, it's been our pleasure as always to talk to you. Just remind our listeners one more time, we want to come and see you about dispute resolutions. Where are you?
My office is at Suite 2, 115 Avenue Road East in Hastings, round the corner from the Kmart Plaza opposite the Baby Factory. You'll see there's 3 green and orange signs, people shaking hands. You can't miss them. But ring me first, because I work from home, so I'm not always in the office. I have the office to interview my clients, so as we've got the quiet privacy.
And your phone number is?
878 5607, area code 06.